The July 24th, thank you, special study meeting of the Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Additionally, the agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city's website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission are outlined on the reverse side of tonight's agenda. State law establishes planning commissions. The commission is comprised of 9 members, all of whom volunteered to serve. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. The other individuals seated at the table this evening are representatives of the city's planning department, city attorney's office, city's planning consultant Carlisle Wortman Associates. If you wish to address the planning commission, please come forward when recognized and provide your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. And at this time, I ask that all cell phones, Blackberries, PDAs, or any other devices that might disrupt this meeting, please be placed in silent mode or turned off. And the roll call, please.
Mr. Edmonds?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Kempen?
Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Mr. Zanzika?
Here.
Mr. Shepke?
Here.
Mr. Schultz?
Here.
Mr. Stratt?
Here.
Mr. Tagle?
Thank you, Kathy. All right. Do we have a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Kempen?
Would it be appropriate for me, since I wasn't here at that meeting?
No,
I have-
no, just the approval of tonight's agenda, you're fine.
Oh, the agenda, sorry. Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Shepke?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
All right, you all have seen copies of the minutes to July 10th, 2012 regular meeting. Are there any discussion points, comments, or can I have a motion? Mr. Sanzika?
Second.
Right.
Mr. Kempen?
As I started before, would it be appropriate, since I wasn't, okay, I have no objections.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Shepke?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Abstain.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
All right. Is there anyone in the public that has any comment for items that are not on the agenda tonight? All right, see no one. Zoning Board of Appeals report. Is that you, Mr. Stratt?
There's only one item on the agenda, which was a lot split in three lot splits, and it was approved. Other than that was it.
Sweet. Thank you. Any comments or questions for Mr. Stratt? The DDA report? Brent?
There was no DDA meeting this month, so it's a very brief report.
Okay. Would you like to give us a planning and zoning report?
Yes, planning and zoning report. The Planning Commission will be interested to know that the zoning ordinance text amendment permitting drive-throughs for financial institutions in the Big Beaver District was approved last night unanimously by City Council. So it'll be effective within publication or 10 days, whichever is less. That's it.
All right. All right, our first item on the agenda then is the planned unit development. This is a public hearing. Who's going to be doing that?
Well, I think the way, if it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, is I'll briefly talk about the project, and then I'll introduce one of the project architects who's got a PowerPoint presentation. And then following that, we can discuss what's presented in the presentation. And then Mr. Carlisle can summarize the report that was prepared.
Okay, fine.
Those of you who were at the meeting will recall that we talked about, we first saw the PUD concept a number of weeks ago, and there was a lot of discussion about this potential planned unit development project, which is a mixed-use project, and includes approximately 20,000 square feet of retail and a 4,000 square foot bank branch with a drive-through on the Big Beaver frontage. And then to the north and behind, it's proposed that they have 16 single-family detached residential units. And again, the Planning Commission discussed this, and there was a lot of discussion about the design of the retail component, in particular the height and massing of the building, and the public space, the plaza area in front of the building and between the buildings. That was kind of talked about at length. The applicant has listened to the planning commission, made some changes to the design, and they'd like to kind of talk about what's proposed and generate some dialogue with the planning commission. I'm going to hand this to Mark Nikita, who is here. I'm going to put your PowerPoint up. Just give me 1 second, Mark.
Before Mark begins,
Would you mind going down to the microphone, man? If you wouldn't mind signing in too, please?
good evening, everyone.
That doesn't amplify, it just picks up your voice, so.
Okay. My name is Jordan Jonah. We're my family. I work with my family at Jordan Development, and we're looking to redevelop this quadrant here. My father, Arkin Jonah, was in front of you last planning commission, and I came in a little late, but I took great notes, and we hired a good design architect, to incorporate different items that were wanted in the building. And we think we have a pretty good understanding and new concept that we'd like to share with you tonight. And we'd like to introduce Mark Nikita. He's mayor of a neighboring city, and he's done a great presentation for us tonight. Thanks.
But, stand over there. Will you pick it up?
Yes.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Should we dim the lights?
That'd be
No?
helpful.
Could you,
The microphone will pick us up.
yeah, try it.
No.
Yeah, that's much better.
Well, good evening. Nice to see you all. There's a couple familiar faces. I'm Mark Nikita. I'm an architect and urban designer with Archive Design Studio. And our expertise is working in walkable, pedestrian-oriented areas, working at the development of these kinds of projects to incorporate a very pedestrian-oriented sort of viewpoint, and looking at the design details and the planning and the integration with the context in a way where it fits in as best as possible and is sensitive to not only the environment that's there, but the growing and developing environment, and specifically with the goals of the community and the big vision. And we're very familiar with the work that you've done on the Big Beaver Corridor. Very familiar with Ron Ray's team, Birchler Arroyo, and what you've done in recent years in developing a vision for the corridor. And we understand that you see that you understand this to be a very key component to the city overall. Obviously, there's a significant amount of investment in this particular corridor, and obviously significant projects that are known throughout the region. So in developing additional sites and projects within that context, obviously sensitivity and importance to being a contributing factor is very important. At the same time, we recognize that your master plan for this area incorporates an orientation toward pedestrian activity, placemaking, de-emphasizing the automobile to some degree, connecting the assets and the elements that are there, and really making it a continuous place. And we recognize that, we've seen that in your planning, we've seen that in your vision, and in any new development going along, we see that that's important to be incorporated. And with that in mind, as a sort of preface for our approach to this, that's of course been a continuous aspect of our thinking as we've looked at how to create something that adds to the things that not only you've done, but ultimately will be a contributing factor in the long term. With that in mind, I just want to go over a couple of, just a few slides on the thinking and the approach and the observations that we've made and incorporated into the development as we've looked at the design details, not only in terms of architecture, but of course in terms of planning. I think one of the key components is that we see that good urbanism and good urban design is critical, and architecture is a contributing factor to that. Great architecture and not so great urban design doesn't necessarily make a good project, so it's a combination of those things. So we're not only looking at the architecture, but we're also looking at our urban components. And again, with the focus on not only the context, the connected aspects, but the pedestrian-oriented aspects. Of course, their site is in this area here, and we've looked very carefully at what we have as part of the context and what we have as part of this corridor, but also, again, keeping in mind the vision that you have and the ideas for longer term, you know, a 10-year, 20-year out sort of period. At the same time here, there's a larger picture. And we recognize, of course, you already have pedestrian activity there, you have pedestrian linkages, and there's a certain setback that's there. We're recognizing these components of what exists and how that may evolve over time. So there's a site as it exists currently. So we first looked at some of the context in Big Beaver overall. We're looking at aspects of the scale of the buildings, the materials of the buildings, the articulation of the buildings that are in the immediate context, some of the ways that the entrances and the windows and the walls are treated, and some of the signage elements, some of the key architectural elements, just observing sort of the overall context and recognizing what we have there, what's been there for a long time, what is new, you know, newer structures that are in the area, and how they've addressed the street, and some of the more recent things, and not only how they've addressed the street, the scale, the materials, and the vegetation. A number of a series of things up until the recent things that have been done just recently opened. So we look specifically at elements also. So that's the overall observation we recognize. But looking at the particular elements, the materials, and these architectural sort of elements, the horizontal wood elements here, the way that the street and the sidewalk connect, the way the materials and the vegetation address the sidewalk, and some of these key metal or architectural achievements as they connected to the street and the sidewalk. All things we were observing to recognize the general context. Not to say that any number of these things are perfect or the best thing to do, but just a recognition of what's there and working with that. And also elements of signage, kind of articulating the way that these kinds of things have been done throughout these this immediate area, and also recognizing a sort of pattern and a vernacular. Something that's to be said here is the recognition that a place is part of material and color and a typology that actually is consistent, and therefore you create a place as a collective. And there is some continuity that is here, as you can see with some of the images, the colors, the materials, some of the articulation, the integration of the materials, whether it's metal, wood, stone, and other things. There is a continuation of that. So we're recognizing these kinds of things as we go along, so that when we inject something new, that it starts to sort of contribute and help to make the place. And again, not only the integration of the pedestrian, but vegetation, material, setback, height, scale, those kinds of things. And this is the context that we're working with. Now, one other key point of that, taking it to another level, one overall, the other sort of materials and general elements, the other is key focal points. One of the things that we recognize is that in order to create place, you know, you've heard the term, is there a there there, or there is no there there. Well, one of the reasons why you do see a place that actually is notable or recognizable is that, you know, there tends to be a cadence of recognition of key elements as you go along, things that sort of catch your eye or that help to make place and establish a differentiation from one area to another. So we're recognizing that as well. Tower elements or entry elements that are significant, out of the ordinary, a little atypical. You see that in some of the buildings here, this fire station. The large clock, another element. These are sort of elements that are part of the architectural context that help to create a sense of place, recognizing as you go along, oh, there's that big clock, you know, that's something that's distinguishable as you go along. If they're not there, then there's a sameness, and part of making a place is having things that catch your eye and allow you to identify the unique aspects of that particular place. And even with the new project here in Granite City, you know, the element of the tower with the sign and the materials there help to establish those sort of elements as you go along. And this is just a composite of that. Another thing that we're looking at is the opportunity to create a place. And in a development of any sort, and knowing that this particular area in your master plan is a place that you see that will allow people to come and become a center in a sense. Not that there's any one particular place that will be the center, but maybe a series of centers, a series of nodes, and a series of places that might come to be. And it's a little different than, let's say, in downtown Detroit where there's Campus Martius. It's a major center and everything sort of revolves around it in the core. But the other aspect of that, especially in a linear development like this, is that you have a series of smaller centers or a series of smaller focal points. And that's something we've recognized there. So we're looking at ways of how to incorporate this kind of idea of placemaking into a development where there might be some small, not grand, it's not really creating the great grand scale, but small elements of place where people could come and find a certain aspect of placemaking here. So we wanted to look at how to incorporate some of that. So we look at some precedent examples. How do you start to see those places that people want to gather and sit, relax, or whatever, and how could we look at incorporating that kind of scale or that kind of idea into a development of this sort? The other aspect of that is how do you allow the pedestrian environment to be comfortable, separated from the car traffic or the busier traffic, and scaled to a point where it addresses the street and addresses the sidewalk or the street on the outside of the building and the sidewalk in a manner where it incorporates possible sitting areas, that separation of where traffic and pedestrians go, to help to incorporate the scale of the pedestrian into the building, and then incorporate vegetation and potentially trees so that you have some coverage for scale. So these are some of the elements that we've looked at as a precedent. These are just ideas that we know that are out there that work to do these kinds of things that we think may work well in this particular area if incorporated into a design development. The other thing is the idea of a rhythmic series of elements that help to create a path or a passage from one place to another. These series of light posts, so they're just the lights on top of these posts, the rhythm of doing that sort of periodically help to create the pedestrian. This is a pedestrian walk here. The pedestrian and bike walk, actually, it's an integration. That rhythm of the light posts going down through that block and then after block after block help to create the connection between where we're at and where we're going. And so the idea of path and connection is important, and we're looking at how the site could potentially do that and how we might incorporate that rhythm to allow that passage to happen. And even more beyond that, just the vertical lighting element, but even to create even more of a path-connected idea, which ultimately could actually even become a place in its own way. So these are elements that we've observed, that we've recognized in other projects, that we may want to include and incorporate. So that's the thinking. So taking all those ideas together and turning them into something that we would see as the development of an idea and turning it into a project that would work well for the site. This is the development of some of those ideas into the site itself. Now, of course, here's the existing context, the existing sidewalk, and the connection to the site that we're working on here. And what we see is a series of opportunities where this whole frontage from the building front, which lines up essentially with the scale of the other buildings along the adjacent side of the street, that our building fits within that. And then this zone in front of it has not only the rhythm of trees that are there already, but then we have this sort of promenade opportunity that can evolve. So this is sort of conceptually how we started looking at it, but more importantly, how this development starts to connect to the adjacent so that the continuity between building and place starts to happen. One is, the idea of the pedestrian path that exists and how it incorporates with our project, but also opportunities of connecting the project in different ways, not only pedestrian-wise, but vehicularly. So where there's sort of this mid-level street behind here, and I call it a street because it's really an access to the parking, but it really acts kind of as a street in its own way. And it allows itself to sort of connect to the other buildings so that they're integrated and they work together. The pedestrian path works together, and that it also comes through, you know, with the network that's existing. And that's the other element, going a little bit more in detail with that, is the opportunity of looking how the front, where there is mostly pedestrian activity, and the rear, where there's pedestrian and vehicular activity, start to connect. And that's where the passage and connection really comes into place. The idea where there could be a passage, as I defined with some of our precedent images, this idea that connection could happen in some type of rhythmic passageway that becomes a place, could potentially be incorporated. So that was one of our ideas. And this is the evolution of that in a three-dimensional study. So what you see sort of evolving there is how this frontage becomes a bit more of a place where there's the integration of the natural element, the pedestrian element, the separation element, which is this sort of planter idea with the trees. That may be a place that you could sit and relax. And then the actual building sort of zone between the building and there where the pedestrian connection from space to space works. But in addition to that, the idea of a focal point, which goes back to some of the ideas of that rhythm along Big Beaver, as we've defined with some of the other projects nearby, that there may be some type of tower element or endpoint which becomes a focal point. And also within the main building, that could also have something like that as well, which we've looked at developing sort of a significant element in the center that becomes this focal point. And the connection between the front and the back, as I mentioned in the plan, the previous image, starts to also become not only just a passageway, a walkway, but something that's really more of a place that's linear, that connects the front and the back and really helps to become another element of that focal point. So this gives us a sort of overview of those things coming together. And some of the imagery of how these elements of the materials, looking back at the materials of the context, looking at the Big Beaver corridor in general, and the idea of incorporating stone and brick and glass and signage and these kinds of things as we see in the context there, and incorporate that in a certain way. Now, getting to a more detailed version of that plan, this is an example of that front in a little bit more detail. And our thought here is that, again, we're incorporating the vegetation along the front here at the street level, the existing sidewalk as it would be connected to the adjacent, the opportunity for vegetation sort of buffers, potential tower element that becomes that focal point, designating the project and part of the rhythm of the bigger area. And then this passageway starts to look at the opportunity of connecting to a small place where there may be tables and chairs and a place to actually sit and relax as you come along the corridor from, you know, one end to another. So we see this as being sort of an opportunity as somewhat of a pedestrian place that's not only part of the project, of course, but actually part of the bigger area, really part of the corridor overall. It becomes one of those places as you go along that contribute to making it a pedestrian sort of overall place. So these are some of the details. And these are just simply different articulated ways of dealing with the paving pattern that help to define the promenade at the entrance, as well as the passageway from front to back, as well as the distinguished place, which is sort of enclosed by planting aspects, which help to create an enclosure and a scale that's comfortable for pedestrians to relax. And then we have some sort of rough sketches of that idea. This is, if you will, a view sort of looking this way, showing the bank building and the walkway, as it were, in that sort of way. So it gives you the scale of the place here, the walkway back to the rear, the building on the right, and the bank on the left. And another sketch showing that place over here, the vegetation in the enclosure, people sitting and relaxing, and then the linkage between the promenade and the front along the sidewalk all the way back to where the parking is. And that we see as a place where, you know, if you're walking down the street, and even if you're not even in coming to this building, that you may use it as a place along this linear corridor. And this looks at some of the development of the incorporation of the tower. These are design ideas of the incorporation of the tower, the element, the materials, and some of those elements that connect and help to make that space. And another variation of that. And then a more developed variation of that into a full elevation. Here's the bank, a tower element, the passageway, the main building, and a sort of a central focus area. Again, in this case, you'd have sort of a focal point in the corner and a focal point part of this building. And again, the materials would be looking at the kinds of things, high quality, long-term building, a building built to last, and a building that would look like a building of high quality, not only today, but for many years. So there's stone and brick and glass and signage that's appropriate and would be long-lasting. And we also looked at the articulation of this so that there's a sense of depth and a sense of articulation. So it does give that character, I think, that's part of a lot of the buildings in there. And then lastly, that whole frontage, just the sort of the detail to get a sense of the breakdown of the sidewalk, the street, the promenade, the building, and the relationship of the whole thing. If you will, looking east, the street is here, Big Beaver. This is the existing front apron from the street, which is grass, and there are already trees in that frontage. This is the existing sidewalk, essentially. This is the planter elements, where it could be a seating area with some landscape, and then the area in between the building, and give you a sense of the scale of the building in relationship to all of those things, and then the retail space itself. So, with that, if we have anything to add, I'd be happy to ask any questions or answer any questions regarding some of the things that we're looking at. And if you have anything else to add from our team?
You asking your team if they have any other comments?
Yeah, if there's anything else before we...
Good evening, my name is Arkin Jonah.
Do you mind going up to the microphone? Thanks.
It's not amplified, it's to pipe it into the room.
Oh, I see.
Good evening, my name is Arkin Jonah, Mr. Chair, if I may. I'm very thankful that I get an education every time I sit with you, and I listen to urban renewalism and the way that you put the thing together. I think you've done a great job. There are a couple issues that we looked at also that you articulated, but I don't know if we brought it up, was the height of the building, the mass of the building. You know, we're doing retail space here without a second floor. We've added footage to the building, in the middle of the building, and if you could look at the massing of what we've tried to create, we've taken the building considerably higher than what we had it to, so that we create the thought of mass of a two-story building versus a one-story. Another item that we looked at, and we looked at different ways to control the vehicular traffic going, that's accessing the side streets from the property. We're looking at traffic control and no right turns are going due north on from the property. Everything would have to service, would be brought in south. If you could turn the site plan there. Yeah. One more. There you go. Anything that would leave this property would turn left going towards Big Beaver or southbound. We've also looked at to the north portion of the property, and Mark was really involved in that, of developing the 16 lots. But do you have that on your?
North of here?
North of this, yeah.
It's not on this, in this PowerPoint.
We'll have a visual that we can put up on the other slide show that can show that.
Maybe we'll address that later then, Frank. That's about it. I mean, if there are any questions, we'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, if I could just add a couple things about the scale. As I mentioned, and I think I mentioned that these elements as being these focal points, but also the scale of the building is quite significant, and actually, many of the other buildings that we looked at on Big Beaver, this would be actually a bigger building than most of the one-story buildings that you have throughout, you know, the Ocean Prime and Granite City and the Starbucks and those other buildings that have recently been built that are one-story, that are pretty significant in height for a one-story building. This is actually more enhanced than that. Not only do we have a high ceiling, floor-to-ceiling situation, but we've created a facade element. The facade elements are taller, and again, they're substantial in terms of materials. So there is a sense of scale that we're really sensitive to, and we're recognizing. And if you look at just the sense of that in the elevation, you can see that this is the scale of a person, and you can see that this is quite considerable, and it gets bigger, obviously, in certain aspects. So we're sensitive to the fact of prominence and the importance of the corridor, and we're recognizing that the building should be prominent in that regard, and we have gone beyond, I think, what would be necessarily a required retail-oriented use, and taking it to a higher level, because we know that the prominence of this particular site is quite important, and we would want it to be as prominent and as important as the contributing factor, as I mentioned earlier. So that is, I appreciate that Arkin brought that up. I just wanted to clarify the thinking on that as well.
Oh, I just had a question. You know, you did a beautiful job along Big Beaver, but I'm curious, you know, the people will be coming from the back of the building. And I would imagine there'll be entrances from the back, and they'll have access to the front. But do you have any elements or any architectural elements in the back that,
Yeah, the elevation in the back, actually, it's not shown here because we're really just focused on it, but the elevations in the back would take much of the same elements of here and apply appropriately in the back. They may not be as prominent because I don't think the height necessarily, but it's not going to be a drive-it rear. It'll be a well-done rear, because we, of course, know that many people will be coming and parking here, and we don't want people coming into a building that we consider to be an exceptionally high-quality retail development, and have a good portion of the people coming to something that doesn't appear to that level, of course.
The rear of the building, or the northern portion of the building, is gonna have the same materials. We're not gonna have a back of a shopping center looking here. It's gonna be the same materials, the same design, all four. So it's not, we're not stopping in the front. The front's gonna be copied to the rear. And what I was gonna say earlier, if you look at what Mark has done with the drawing versus what we designed earlier on, we had a level-looking building. We had some prominence with designs of the facade. Where Mark, if you could go back to the elevation, there you go. Right,
This one?
right there. And if you look at what Mark did, and to bring that prominence, to bring that focal point to the middle of the building, where the ends of the building are, you know, limestone, but a little bit lower in coming back to the middle, and eventually to the center of the building, where he brings that prominence, he brings that focal point smack to the middle with the same materials. The inverse of going in and out of the building also brings a lot of definition to the architecture of the building, where you can, the limestone stands out versus the stacked stone versus the glass. So, you know, you're exploiting the major features of the architecture, of the materials of the architecture by doing that.
So I'd be happy to answer any questions about what we're proposing, and how are you?
Tom?
Like to?
Hi, Mark. My name's Tom Krent. Overall, it's a big improvement from what we saw originally, as far as materials, architectural details, but I have two major concerns. Number one is traffic, and number two is how it blends in or works with the residential streets that go on either side. Now, when it was under the PUD of the Monarch, they had that same idea, prominence, just like you are trying to do it at obviously a smaller scale. But what they wanted to really set this development off was to enhance, as part of their benefit to the public, there's a public benefit element of a PUD. And what they did was they enhanced both Alpine and McClure so that when people drove, because hopefully, you know, you're gonna have people coming in and out on those side streets, they made those prominent. And the way they did it was they enlarged the street, they completely redid the paving, they had all new landscaping on those two streets from Big Beaver all the way back to the end of their property, the back of their property. They put in pedestrian lighting. It made like bookends to that development. And I don't see anything happening in your proposal at this point. I mean, I realize it's a concept at this point, but I would like to see something happening there. Now, that's how the store interacts with the surrounding area. The other element is traffic. And I did submit, I don't know if Mr. Jonas sent you my suggestions on moving the bank from where it is now to the eastern end of that building. It was shift the retail stores to the west and put the bank on the other side. And the reason is you've got 3 lanes of traffic. Now, maybe I just illustrate this for the public a little easier if I stand up. And sometimes it's easier to show than to just flap your lips for 15 minutes. Let's give a real situation. As a matter of fact, what I did, I have a 15-minute video that I did on the Monarch when we had our neighbors, basically 4 or 5 of us, stack up cars and see what happens with traffic flow. And what happened is, it's at rush hour, it took between 1 and 5 minutes for the 5th car to come out onto Big Beaver. Now, if during 5 o'clock people are going to the bank, they come around, most people will not probably enter this way because they don't see the bank yet. They'll enter onto Alpine and probably circle around. Now, as these people are backed up 5 deep, these people are trying to get out. Now, how are these people going to get out if these people are backed up 5 deep? They're not. And one person will think, oh, I'll just kind of rush in. Well, he'll block this point. The traffic coming in here will block, and this whole lane becomes blocked. I think this is a giant traffic congestion right here. Moving this to this side will create a flow, and I've got drawings I can hand out later. How that could work simply and ease this congestion in this residential district. Don't forget, this leads to a residential district, and no place in the city on Big Beaver do we have a bank exiting or entering from a residential street. This would be the only one. And I don't think it's a commercial business. It should not be entering or exiting onto a residential street.
Any other questions?
Other questions or comments about clarification? Happy to clarify. Okay.
All right, well,
This the other part, is there another part? Yeah.
We're going to summarize the
Okay, very good.
report.
Okay. Thank you very much.
thanks.
Good evening. As Mr. Savant mentioned, the applicant tonight is coming in for both a conceptual as well as a preliminary PUD approval. Part of the preliminary PUD approval is approval of a site plan. We have put together and we sent out a rather lengthy memo, which I hope you had the opportunity to read in detail. I'm going to very quickly kind of go over the main issues, but I think the focus of what I want to start the discussion off is kind of a bigger picture conceptual idea of what the applicant here is proposing. When we started working with the applicant on this proposal, one of the things that really came to our attention was the balance between what was requested and required and envisioned as part of the master plan as well as the Big Beaver corridor plan versus what the impact upon the surrounding neighborhood was going to be. And that's all coupled with the fact that we live in a different economy now, in a different market than what was approved as part of the Monarch plan, as well as what was envisioned in the Big Beaver corridor plan. So just a little background on what was approved at the Monarch plan. The Monarch PRD was approved in 2005, and that included 2 residential towers with 155 units. Coupled with that was 52 separate townhome units, 17,000 square feet of retail, and in totality, 496 parking spaces, and that included 319 spaces in a garage space. So what's being proposed tonight in front of us is a PUD with 27,000 square feet and 16 detached single-family residential units. So as you can see, the scope, impact, scale, intensity is much, much, much less than what was approved as part of the Monarch PUD project. Everyone will be aware that we did work strongly with the applicant to try to increase the amount of what we call massing and bulk and presence on Big Beaver, what they're proposing. And the applicant has gone, in our opinion, has gone a long way to kind of address some of those issues. Many of the aspects of the proposal do meet the requirements of the master plan. The applicant has placed the building along the street, along Big Beaver, to create a street presence. They have increased the height in some of the massing and bulking without adding any more usable floor area to cause traffic impacts, as well as incorporated better architectural connections between the bank and the retail building. They have added a significant, what we find a significant public benefit in what we're calling the public realm, which Mr. Nikita went over in great detail, so I won't go over that, but that is a significant public benefit that would be an advancement of the street and can be really a model that can be continued along Big Beaver as more development occurs. In regards to the residential density, again, they are proposing 16 units. By right, under traditional zoning, they would be allowed 12 residential units in that area, so they're only increasing the amount of residential units by 4 units as part of the PUD process. We do find that the 16 units does meet the intent of the master plan, which calls for increased number of residential units either on Big Beaver or within proximity to Big Beaver, so we're putting more residential units within walking area of Somerset and other retail uses along Big Beaver. And we do find it does provide an adequate buffer between the commercial aspect on the front of Big Beaver and the potential impacts on the north side and the adjacent neighborhood. We did meet with the traffic consultant from OHM today, as well as the traffic staff engineer for the city. And their initial findings were that they felt that this increase of 27,000 square feet of retail would rather have a negligible effect upon traffic in the surrounding area, and especially along Big Beaver. They find that the proposed uses, which are more retail-oriented and kind of restaurant-oriented, and banks don't have necessarily a peak user time, so you're not getting the influx at 5 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning when you're going to have office users coming at peak times, and then it's going to kind of defecate or slow down in the middle of the day. This will have a constant flow of a little bit of increased traffic throughout the day. They feel that most of the traffic will exit from Big Beaver as well as onto Big Beaver, and the potential for increased traffic within the neighborhood will be most likely of neighborhood users actually coming down to use this site. They're not sure that people would go to the site off Big Beaver and then travel up through the neighborhood to get to other locations within the city. They did review the curb cut issue. They did have a specific proposal in regards to the curb cut, the south curb cut for the bank. They've asked the applicant to actually move the curb cut up about 20 feet in order to provide for a little more space coming off of Big Beaver Road, and that's something the applicant will be asked to address. But in terms of the removal of curb cuts, they don't find that reducing the curb cut allowance from 3 to 2 will necessarily negate or cause any sort of detriment for or against the amount of traffic or potential traffic on Alpine. So in conclusion, we do want to stress that we have worked with the applicant to try to increase the amount of massing and bulk on Big Beaver, and we find that based on the balance of the impact of the neighborhood as well as what the master plan calls for in light of the current considerations, we find the applicant has gone a long way from what we initially reviewed. And furthermore, based on the underlying zoning of what the Big Beaver would call for, this meets all the requirements and actually goes above and beyond what the Big Beaver corridor in itself requires. So we do find that outside of a few site planning issues that we have addressed, conceptually, we find the applicant has taken the appropriate measures to mitigate potential impacts on the surrounding neighborhood, as well as provide the massing scale and bulk that was kind of envisioned as part of the Big Beaver master plan. All this in light of the current flexible or the non-flexible conditions of the current economic market. So that's kind of our big our big overview of what the concept of here is. Now, we do note that there are numerous, however, more minor site planning issues that we'd like the applicant to address. And I don't know if we want to go into the minutia of those right now, or we want to get a bigger discussion with the planning commission regarding the kind of the conceptual idea of the plan, so the applicant
Well,
has a good idea of where they're moving.
yeah, well, you've all heard the overall presentation, you've heard the initial comments. Are there any questions or discussions at this point? Mr. Hudson?
I'm impressed with Mr. Kren's analysis of the traffic with the bank, and I'm in agreement with him. I think if you flipped that bank to the opposite side, there's no through street, but merely parking facilities, that's gonna take care of the same problem that you've got, and that shouldn't do any destruction to the concept itself, if we just flip it.
Mr. Schultz?
I'll start with a comment, and then I have some other things written down. My only concern if you do that is that we just got approval to put drive-throughs on Big Beaver, provided they are not visible from Big Beaver. And if you flip that, I don't see how you're gonna get the cars out of the drive-through without a curb cut on the Big Beaver, which is prohibited. A curb cut for exiting from a bank onto Big Beaver is prohibited under the zoning ordinance.
Wait a minute, please.
The new zoning that has just been approved does not allow the driveway from a bank's drive-through to exit directly onto Big Beaver Road. So that's my concern with flipping it. I have a couple other things. When the Monarch was going in, where this petitioner is proposing a cross-access to the building, or the property to the east, we were told that because of the elevation difference, they couldn't put a cross-access there, which I don't know exactly how that's gonna work now. I also, in looking at the drawings and seeing the parcel line, I would have concern as to whether the bank is going to really agree to having the southeast corner of their property be a public plaza for pedestrians and tables and that sort of thing. And I'm also very concerned in looking at the drawing. It appears that the walkway for the pedestrians is something in the neighborhood of 7 to 8 feet wide, and that's not terribly awfully wide. I'm scaling, I don't have a scale with me, but I'm scaling it against the parking space that has to be 9.5 feet. And that walkway is nowhere near 9.5 feet. So those are my concerns. I think it's a vast improvement over what we had, and I like it a lot better than what was here a few weeks ago.
Any other questions, any other comments? Mr. Carla, do you want to get into any of the minutia at this point?
Did you want to have a public hearing first?
No.
It might be worth just highlighting some of the more significant site planning issues that we've raised. In regards to, I'll start in regards to the commercial site plan. We do note that the applicant is actually exceeding the total amount of parking required by the ordinance by approximately 25 spaces. That's fine, but it should be noted that they also are under in the terms of total amount of landscaping for the site. So we asked the applicant to consider reducing the amount of parking in order to accommodate additional site landscaping. As I noted, the traffic engineer does have some issues with the access for the bank egress. We'll show the applicant the comments that he had, and so we would ask the applicant, it will not change the site plan necessarily, but it will change the access point to make it a little bit farther north along Alpine Drive. As I noted, landscaping, they are deficient in terms of the 20% requirement. I believe they are only providing approximately 12% total site landscaping, so we asked them to increase to 8% in the commercial area. There are some issues with the photometric and lighting plan that was submitted. They exceed the allowance of 20-foot candles and maximum, so we asked them to reduce that. And lights should be noted that lights should be turned off after 11 o'clock at night, between 11 o'clock at night and sunrise. Those were our Only significant issues in regards to the commercial section of the planning and development in terms of site planning issues. In the terms of the residential, we do note that while they do not necessarily meet the requirements of the R1B, this is a PUD, so there allows some flexibility in terms of design standards. The design standard, the area width and bulk set requirements are being asked to have relief from, to increase the density from 12 units to 16 units. However, they should submit a zoning calculation for us to actually determine the actual amount of relief they are requesting. In addition, they have provided a rear setback that is adjacent to the existing single-family neighborhood to the north. They've requested a setback of 30 feet. The underlying R1B is 45 feet. We just asked them to increase that setback to 45 feet to comply with the underlying R1B zoning district requirements. In terms of parking, they greatly exceed the amount of parking required. They are providing at least two parking spaces in the units, as well as driveway parking, and they are proposing some on-street parking in the proposed new road that they are proposing. The applicant is indicating that they're going to remove, if not most of the trees, all of the trees, and so we do ask them, we can't require it, but we do ask them to consider selective tree elimination if possible, so they don't have to do that. So if they can preserve whatever trees are out there, we do request that. In regards to sidewalks, the applicant has shown that they are proposing a sidewalk along the length of Alpine from the southern boundary of the new road all the way south to Big Beaver. We asked them to install a sidewalk as well along the north side of Alpine, adjacent to their development. In addition, the applicant has not provided a sidewalk along McClure. We asked them to add a sidewalk along their portion of the development that fronts on McClure, so they need to add a sidewalk onto that side as well. And lastly, the applicant has not submitted floor plans and elevations for the proposed new residential units, and we just asked them to do that.
Submitted the elevations.
Okay, the elevations were submitted. We have not had time to review them apparently, so we asked them to submit that in a future date. That concludes any significant issues that we found in terms of the site plan. We did review the PUD under the PU standards under Article 11. Again, we find this meets, provided that site plan issues are addressed, we do find this meets the intent of the standards of the PUD as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Carlisle regarding the latter part of his report? All right, this is a public hearing. Anyone from the audience would like to get up and speak? Now is the time. Please sign in and speak up at the microphone.
Mr. Chairman, could I add one thing? I would just want to say for the record that we received written information from Susan Tompkins and from Stephen and Kelly Grayson, and both comments were submitted to the Planning Commission for their review.
Good evening. My name is Jean Stein, and I have lived at the corner of Bowen and Alpine in the adjacent sub to this proposed development for 50 years. Some of the homeowners in my sub have been there much longer than that. We enjoy the luxury of R1B zoning, and most of us have made our homes our biggest investment, caring for and enjoying our very large lots. The high density or small area in which 16 homes are planned for this development is not at all compatible, or does it conform to the neighboring properties. I understand it's admitted under PUD. On Alpine, there are 16 homes on each side of the street. The street extends for 1/2 mile, or 2,640 feet. This plan before us calls for 8 homes on each side of a street and extends for only 600 feet, and shows ingress and egress from both Alpine and from McClure Streets. The current plan also shows 4 curb cuts onto Alpine, one being from the proposed residential street. A more attractive, fairer, and less detrimental plan to the current properties would call for fewer homes a cul-de-sac backing up to Alpine Street, eliminating one of the 4 curb cuts on Alpine, and ingress and egress would come from McClure only. This still leaves Alpine with 3 curb cuts. Now, according to my understanding last night, and Mr. Schultz does not agree, I thought that the city council voted in a new ordinance that would allow privileges for banks on Big Beaver to enter and leave. Obviously, I misunderstood that last night. I don't know, but if that is true, we could easily accommodate the bank going to the east end, and this would alleviate the problem of another curb cut on Alpine, which would leave us with 2 curb cuts rather than the initial 4. With the current plan with the bank, I believe it's very dangerous, especially for drivers and pedestrians entering and exiting Alpine. Another very serious consideration is the concern for our children. As you undoubtedly know, our subdivision has no sidewalks, and the children in our neighborhood walk to both the elementary and the middle school, which are both located on Bowen Street, right around the corner at the end of Alpine. We already experience traffic problems because currently Alpine is used as part of a cut-through during rush hour traffic to avoid the light and the Michigan left-hand turn at 16 Mile Across. The additional 16 homes would probably generate 32 cars, more than our current residents generate. Another item which would aid in traffic movement would be an additional light allowing for cross-street pedestrian traffic, either east of McClure or east of Alpine. I have personally waited in my car on Alpine to access Big Beaver Road for as much as 3.5 minutes when I am right at the street. Of course, I know this question is out of your hands. Having said all this, I very much appreciate the fact that Jonah Development Company is considering the application of Big Beaver Center at this site. It's long overdue. The corner has been vacant for a number of years, and this development will certainly attract new people to Troy, as well as to enhance the streetscape here, and it will also help the city's revenue stream. Thank you. I recognize the name Jonah. The Jonah Company's reputation precedes itself. Consequently, I anticipate the very best and hope that some of my concerns will be given consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Barbara Dawson, and I live on Boland Street. So if you go north on Alpine, it runs right into Boland Street. And that cut through that Jean was mentioning, I live through every day. Our streets are very long and very straight, and the cars can get a lot of speed up trying to cut through and avoid the lights at Big Beaver. So it is a concern for not only myself, but my neighbors also. Not only on our streets, Alpine and Boland where I live, but the other streets in the neighborhood, including the new houses that would be going in here. Because our children do walk to school. It's actually quicker to walk to school or to ride your bikes to school than to drive all around to enter the schools from the other side. So there is a lot of walking, there are a lot of children, and we really need to, I feel, make a conscious effort to make sure that we keep the traffic down within the neighborhood. I agree with a lot of what Mrs. Stein has said, and she probably said it better than I ever could. I just want to reiterate a couple things that I'm in favor of also. One is making the residential area where all the houses, the new houses would be going in, a dead end or a cul-de-sac. I think that would be more inviting to the people living there, so that they would not have traffic flowing down their street. And it would eliminate some of the traffic going out onto Alpine because there are already so many curb cuts going onto Alpine. The other thing is, I agree with the changes in flipping the bank over, if if the rules allow, because that is a very difficult corner to turn into. And when you're going eastbound on Big Beaver, and you go to make the turnaround to get back onto Alpine, you have to cut through all those lanes of Big Beaver traffic in order to make a right-hand turn onto Alpine. It's tough as it is right now. And then you add a bank exiting, cars exiting, pedestrians walking there. It's a formula for an accident. And I think by flipping the bank to the other side, it would help tremendously in easing the congestion that's going to occur on that corner. The final thing I would like to say, and I don't know if this was considered or this is part of the master plan, but I see a lot of successful businesses, retail facilities with parking in front. And I know a lot of people don't like to go to those stores that you have to park behind. They like everything up front. I go throughout our city and other cities, and I see a lot of the successful ones with parking up front and the building in the back. I'm more familiar with Clausen because my father had a business there, my brother's running it now for 40 some odd years, and they had a lot of, there were some places there where the buildings were right up on the curb and the parking in the back, and they ended up tearing them down to switch it, and all of a sudden business picked up and is better, and the parking lots are full and the businesses are doing better. So, downtown didn't do that in that particular city, and I know there's a lot of other cities that show success with the businesses close to the curb. And in that city, they're adding street side parking. So it's something to consider, not just for us trying to reduce the traffic going down our street, but as a business perspective, a lot of people like the idea of your parking's right there, you're visible, you're not coming in the back door, so to say. And if you're planning on a pedestrian area, it's more inviting to sit off of a busy road, not right on a busy road. It's more inviting when there's a setback off the busy road. So those are my comments. I hope you take them into consideration.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Susan Tompkins, and I live on Vanmore Street, which is in the neighborhood north of this development. And it was interesting in all the discussion, there is a lot of concern about traffic in the neighborhood, and that's why I'm here. And one of the gentlemen talked about a traffic study that was completed, and whoever completed the study said I think I heard correctly, said they don't expect a significant increase in traffic in the neighborhood. Well, that's easy to throw out there for somebody who's not involved or living in that neighborhood, but there is going to be a significant increase. Based on the office buildings that already exit onto McClure and Alpine, the traffic is significant. They come off Crooks through the neighborhood to get to their office buildings, and they leave the office buildings to get to Crooks. That is their path. They don't go out on Big Beaver and head west, and then east on Big Beaver, through the light at Crooks, and back around to head north on Crooks. That doesn't happen. They all come through the neighborhood quickly, or many of them. And if a study was done as to how many of those vehicles from those large parking lots go through the neighborhood, it would be significant. And I would imagine there's been some kind of study done through all the Monarch proposal and the possible development that would have happened with the Monarch project. So we don't have neighborhoods, or we don't have sidewalks in our neighborhood. We don't have buses that take our kids to school. That's where we live. And to have traffic shooting through the neighborhood day after day, and as someone pointed out, banks don't have noon or 5 o'clock traffic. It's all day. Stores are all day. That's going to go through our neighborhood, and I don't know how fair that is to those of us living there. And my second point is, I understand why we want the store sitting on Big Beaver. There's a presence there, that's an important corridor in Troy, and it looks fantastic, and the city's done a great job developing Big Beaver, and I'm proud to live in the area. But I'm wondering, who are all these pedestrians that are gonna be hanging out at the tables? I guess it's gonna be the people that park behind the building and then walk around them or through that 7-foot corridor to get to the front and hang out. Because there's not a lot of pedestrians traveling from Somerset Mall to this development. That's throwing me a little bit. I know we want a downtown area, but I don't think a few storefronts constitute that. And I just hope that the city will take us into account when developing this.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Sharon, I live on McClure. My house is actually right across from some of those vacant lots that your thing's going to. As of right now, we do have traffic that comes through. I've been hit almost a couple times pulling in my driveway because I was going too slow in our street. So there is a lot of concern whether the bank's on Alpine or McClure or what project goes in there. We have a big concern as it is. And I just can't see it. I'm wondering because the 3 houses that were taken out, I'm the 3rd house in and right across the street. I no longer have small children, but I have a lot of grandchildren that come over. And I would like to know who are these people that are going to be wandering through. As of right now, I get people coming through my backyard that's cutting through those businesses. So, I don't know. I'm not much of a speaker, and I've been there for 36 years. And, you know, it's just, there's concern. There's big concern.
Ma'am, did you give your full name? I didn't.
Yes, Sharon Mitchell.
Sharon Mitchell. Thank you, Sharon. Anyone else from the audience? All right, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the table for discussion. Gordon.
I really like the plans. I like what's been done. I like the flow. I like the scale. I like the prominence. I like the way it leads into the Somerset project down the street. I like that the architect took into a lot of the enhancements on other buildings and continued that flow through this project. You know, I do have some concern with the bank because my wife was a teller for 18 years. And there are peak times at the banks, and I don't agree with the traffic study that says that they pretty much are the same all day long. There are peak times at banks and especially on drive-throughs. And I think that that is something to take into consideration. I also am concerned for the residents because with parking in the rear, people are going to, especially people that are using it for a cut-through, are going to not pull in off of Big Beaver Road. They're going to continue to come. In fact, it's going to be enhanced, more people cutting through the neighborhoods to get to the rear parking. Again, I like pedestrian access off of Big Beaver, but I do agree with the one lady who got up and talked about having parking in the front. There's something to be said for that, not as far as looks and as far as presentation, if you're a stranger in town coming down 16 Mile, but there's so many aspects of this thing. I think the main job that I feel as a planning commissioner is to protect our neighborhoods, and I want to make sure that we really look into every possible aspect, although this is a beautiful project, and I think something's been needed in that area for a long time. I think that we really, really have to be, I agree with Tom Krent on that bank. I think if there's any way to eliminate a curb cut or to make that go to the other side, I think that we need to look into this real seriously, and I do have some concerns because there are peak periods in the banks. That's all basically, but I love the plan.
Mr. Edmonds.
I have a question for Mr. Sabada. I thought that the new ordinance that was passed last night restricted direct access to Big Beaver. Am I correct?
You're correct. You and Mr. Schultz both are correct. It permits drive-throughs for financial institutions in the Big Beaver zoning district, but does not permit direct access from the drive-through lane to Big Beaver. In other words, it's got to utilize the in lane. It's got to swing around the building, or it's got to utilize a side street before it cannot directly exit the drive-through onto Big Beaver.
I think the question, if I may follow,
Sure.
I think the question of flipping the bank, I believe, as I recall, Mr. Jonah said at one of our previous meetings, that really wouldn't work, or that the bank was not in favor of that either. I'm just not sure how a drive-through at the other end of this piece of property would work and still comply with the non-direct access. I don't know if anyone else has any other suggestions about that. Yeah, I saw you.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on Mr. Edmonds, if I may. This is part of the presentation I gave a few weeks ago. I'm just going to pass them out. And what I show on these drawings is that, number one, the exiting from the bank, if you flipped it, doesn't directly go out onto Big Beaver. The exit goes onto the street, onto that driveway that goes between Northwood University and the new development. And second, the idea of, okay, we can't see, we're not allowed to see the drive-through from Big Beaver. I could flip that blue bank 180 degrees from north to south so that you wouldn't see the traffic going through the drive-through. You wouldn't see the drive-through. And additionally, the way I flipped it, it makes it so that the driver can access an ATM that is against the wall of the bank. So that, again, it's a security thing where you want the bank to service that ATM from inside the bank. So I think I've addressed all those issues, and I could redraw it if you'd like, but there's a definite solution here to have the bank at that location without violating any ordinances and allow for an ATM inside the bank.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Stratt.
I have a fundamental question here. I don't know why this is a PUD, number one. It's not mixed-use occupancy. I don't understand why that is. But that being said, at least I thought that during the process of PUD, we also received samples and materials, etc. But I guess that's gone by the wayside, but that's neither here nor there. I have concern as it relates to the parking.
Tom, we have that.
All the materials.
You do have the materials? Okay, good. The other thing that I have a little concern with is the parking, the 25 spaces, I guess. I have concern that we ran into retail centers where all of a sudden the entire center was actually a restaurant or fast food, and there aren't enough parking spaces. So I do have some concern. How are we going to police that? And what percentage of that are we talking in terms of food service? So that to me is important too. The homes, yeah, I have a tendency of believing, I've also driven down the streets. Those are pretty good sized homes, and I don't think that the number of homes that are there really is compatible with the other homes in the street, down the street, in terms of size and the square footage. And also, you know, that a point that was just made was maybe a couple of cul-de-sacs might work, and one from each side or something, to eliminate the pass-through. And also as part of the benefit to the city of Troy, like the Monarch. They did a lot of different things for us. But they also did the side streets all the way to the property line. They had actually monumental type lighting that they had created for that as kind of an entry point. And a point that they're trying to do is help the residents that live up and down the street there to create a nice environment. And I remember that, Mr. Schultz, I don't know if you remember that as well. But that was a much larger project. I don't know the cost, et cetera, but if it could benefit, but I'm looking for also public benefit on that as well. So those are the items. But in conclusion, I really like to say that Mark made an excellent presentation. Mark was on the planning commission with Birmingham when we were going through the train depot or train station project as well. And now Mark is really, I understand, is on the council or mayor. Your mayor? Okay, mayor of Birmingham now. At any rate, I think he did an excellent job, all in all.
Mr. Schultz.
I think the proposed cross-access to the driveway of the property next door, if it can be worked out, I think it enhances the development greatly, and it will give a direct access into the development off Big Beaver Road. One of the speakers talked about a traffic control device, and this board, how many years ago did we start talking about the Monarch? 8, maybe 10? Been a while, and Brent has heard from this board many times that though it is not within our control or purview, it is the feeling of this body that a traffic control device at that location would be appropriate. I don't know if anyone has ever gone so far as to ask the road commission for Oakland County, but that's the stand of the board. And I agree that, traffic engineers' idea of whether or not an increase in traffic is significant may be completely different than that of the residents. But if in fact these two streets have so much bicycle and pedestrian traffic, maybe they need to approach the city about a special assessment district to establish sidewalks alongside those streets so that it is safer for all the residents because of the traffic that is already there.
Mr. Sanzika, did you have a comment?
I was just curious if, the comments of the bank, flipping the bank, the petitioner would like to address that. Could it be appropriate now to ask the petitioner?
If I could, just one of the concerns that we have about the bank switching is actually, we've looked at that carefully, and we obviously understand that that's an issue, and we've looked at that carefully, and we have received the information that you've sent that we've looked at. One of the concerns that we have that's, I think, when you look at the orientation of people parking to go to the bank, and this is one of the I think one of the key concerns that we have in flipping this is that if you look at where the drive-through needs to be, so it's hidden, the drive-through needs to be on the inside of the development. So you have the bank building, the drive-through, and then the main building. And that drive-through is obviously going to be a place where cars will be coming through. The majority of the parking for the people that come to the bank are actually behind the drive-through, if you will. And so all of the people that will be coming and parking and walking in will have to actually walk across the drive-through lane, the queuing, and that whole situation. And that gets into a functional concern and actually a safety concern that really, to us, and I think when you really look at how it will actually evolve, becomes quite significant and as just a fundamental functional way to deal with just access for the pedestrian to park and come to the bank. It's actually creating a conflict between the car and the pedestrian. So that's one of our main concerns with this idea of flipping. I think fundamentally there's some things there that seem to work, but that clearly is one that's been accentuated in our planning and thoughts when we can.
Also, if you look at how the retail space versus the bank are positioned, if we flip, and this is a marketing issue, if we flip the bank to the eastern end of the building, where the bank today has its own prominence, has its own tower, and it has the architecture to draw attention to that building. If we flip it to the other side, it takes away the point position of the retail building on the eastern end, where if you're driving due west, you would see the bank, and it would take away from the point position of the eastern portion of the retail, where the way it's positioned now, driving east, you have a prominent position for a larger retailer to be in. Where if we put the bank first, it would take the bank, where the bank now has its prominence, you put it on the east side, it takes away that most prominent position of the retail position of a tenant that could go there. I don't know if I made that.
I think it was clear. Thank you. Any other comments? Questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like this plan as far as the facade goes. I mean, it really is stunning. I think it would be a great enhancement to the city. But like what some of the other comments have made, have a little concern that walkway there. It is awful narrow, especially considering we're talking a two-story concrete or block structure. It's going to be awful dark, and it's relative to the store areas. I think that might just be a little bit impeding for pedestrians to come from parking, especially if they have to access the storefronts from the front of the building. It'd be kind of a long walk. And, you know, as much as I am a fan of creating a downtown walking district, I think the majority of pedestrians are coming from the parking lot after driving in, unless they're in the two or a couple over surrounding office buildings. The bank exit is a concern. I like Tom's idea about rearranging it if it's possible to work something like that in. The view of the building, it's not really addressed here. I would like to see some more development of that view from the parking lot side, so that it doesn't turn into a big structure. I really like the styles and the material choices in this case. I'm concerned about the green space requirements not being met, and I think there's opportunities perhaps to carve into the structure of the building to enhance the green space in that regard, to make it more appealing for pedestrians coming in from the back in the parking, or maybe on a corner cut to expand some areas to give a little bit more green space. Three-dimensional texture perhaps on the front or something like that might help. And one other thing is there any concerns with DDA district? I know that comes down in this area as far as this development project. Is it completely separated, the DDA overlay relative to this?
This project would fall within the DDA.
The entire project, including the?
I don't know how far to the north it goes.
Okay, because I know the previous, well, we're adding 2 more lots onto what was previously approved. I wasn't sure how that would be covered, or if there are any concerns we need to consider in that regard, especially if buildings are half on, half off. What impact might be?
That would be an issue for the assessor, but I can look at what the limits are.
Are we going to be discussing the residential part? I know there was no presentation on it tonight. Are we going to have that at another meeting?
Well, there was some comments made by Mr. Carlisle, and there are some elevations in the electronic version. We did not, put them until tonight, and yes, I would expect we're going to have some more discussion on the residential component.
Okay, because I've got some comments about that. I'll maybe just reserve it to that point. Is that?
Well, it would benefit the petitioner to hear your comments.
Well, he did receive my, my suggestions on the residential, and what it comes down to is this. Again, referring back, I realize it's the old PUD, it's a different situation, and before I go even further, maybe I should ask the city attorney. That land that was supposed to be deeded to the city, the two northernmost lots, was that ever deeded to the city?
It was not.
Okay, so those are owned by the applicant at this point?
I'm not sure who owns them, but the city does not.
Okay. Well, since they are no longer, those two lots have never been owned by the city, then let me just give you some basic numbers. The existing lots north of this, the development, are 120 wide, 300 feet deep. That's 36,000 square feet of land for every home. The average home, sort of in our neighborhood, is about 2,000 square feet. That comes to a building covering the ground roughly 5, 6, maybe 7% of the property. Now I haven't, because I didn't see any plan views of the new homes, but looking at the setbacks that they're asking for, it looks like the new homes cover roughly 70% of those lots. So we're looking at really a very low density development to the north, the existing subdivision, and a very high density, very compact development in the new proposed development. What I'm saying is there's got to be some kind of a buffer between those. Now, what I've suggested in my drawings is that right now the developer proposes a 30-foot setback between the back of the house and the northernmost boundary, which is very, very tight, 30 feet for a backyard. Compared to the rest of the subdivision north of that, we have 200-foot deep backyards. So, you know, right there, I see there has to be something done to make a transition between that high density and that low density housing. So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm suggesting that the setback between the new homes and the backyard setback be 100 feet instead of 30. And here's the math on it. If they did that, how deep will the new home lots be? Well, the total distance between the southern boundary of the new residential, and the northern boundary is 3 lots. 120 times 3 is 360 feet. You take away that 100-foot, that one setback, and that 100-foot, but you add back the 30 that they're proposing. So I'm subtracting, I know it's confusing to the audience, I'm sorry about that, but you take the 360 minus 70 feet, and you get 290 feet. You take away 60 foot for the right-of-way, the road with sidewalks. So you're down to 230 feet of homeowner property. You divide that by 2 for each side of the street, you're 115-foot deep lots, which is, I think, sufficient for an R1B area. So what I'm saying is he could still develop substantial homes on lots that are 115 feet deep and provide some kind of a buffer, a transition place between that high density and the very low density subdivision to the north. I'm just a minimum 100. The other PUD had 120-foot buffer plus the setback of the house, so it's maybe another 30 feet. So there was about 150 foot of grass between, or green space between the back of the home and the next adjoining property to the north. So I'm kind of cut that in half from 150 to 70, kind of halving it, but I'm asking for some kind of buffer. It's not a public benefit here. It's not going to be open land for public use, but it's got to be some kind of a buffer transition.
Mr. Edmonds, did you have any other comment?
No, I was just going to ask if we could ask the developer about this narrow passageway. Have you considered anything else?
The passageway between the building and the bank, you're talking about?
Yeah, the width, it's like 7 or 8 feet.
The 8, I think it's 8 foot, and excuse me for not knowing exactly. it's kind of deceptive because it's only 8 feet for only a small portion of the walk. Where you see the angle of the bank, how we did the bank so that it's on an angle, we're actually, and I don't know the dimensions off the top of my head, it's actually 2 or 3 times that width, and it leads into a narrower walkway going in. We've looked at that, and Mark's actually created that passage through where the columns, we've tried defining it, but it's actually a lot more, except for that short span at the northern end of where the 2 buildings come close together.
Yeah, I think that's it's a bit of a perception issue when you look at the plan, because it looks like this long, narrow passageway. And the reality is if you look at the 3-dimensional aspect, it shows that pinching area, which is actually just a relatively short distance. And 8 feet is 3 feet more or less larger than really a required walkway. That, you know, for example, in Birmingham, where we create pedestrian activity throughout the downtown, we have 5 feet clear everywhere. That's the minimum that we have. I mean, that's a clear area. That's a requirement for any type of practice. So we're actually 3 feet beyond what would be required for a typical passageway. But it's a perception issue more than anything. It's more of a, you know, we don't want it to look too narrow. And I think that for example here, it's just actually for a short distance.
And we'll go back to the bank, and I know I can twist an arm there that we're gonna look at that and see if we can make it any wider.
Do our sidewalks, gonna do follow-up with Mr. Seta, how wide do we require sidewalks to be on Big Beaver?
On major thoroughfares, 8 feet.
Mr. Schultz?
Not to be glib, but there's an easy way to make it wider.
Yeah,
Make your building shorter.
You
don't have to go back to the bank. You can make your building 3 feet
The
short.
bank's architect's actually here listening to this.
That's simple.
Well, you've heard a lot of comments, and one comment I hope you take away is we think this is a very nice development. We think you've made a lot of progress since the last time I saw the development, and most of us saw it. There are obviously some concerns that I guess we'd like you to consider. Maybe working with staff and seeing if we can, fine-tune this thing, but we really appreciate and really see the value in taking that dilapidated lot and making it a vibrant place. So, gentlemen, we have a resolution to postpone this matter to consider. Mr. Sanzica?
Whereas the Planning Commission hereby proposes that this item, postpones this item till such time that the applicant submits a complete concept development plan, a preliminary development plan, application that addresses the issues identified by the Planning Commission report.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
The complete plan will include a full proposal for the residential, I'm assuming?
Yes.
We're gonna see everything that is expected for residential, because we'd be buying a pig in a poke right now.
Any other discussion? On the roll call.
Mr. Crin?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Shefke?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Strat?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Kempen?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it, thank you.
All right. Let's move on to the next item. Folks, would you mind stepping out in the hall for the conversation, please? Thank you.
Down the hall.
Thank you very much, good night. Thank you. Night.
All right, the next item is a conditional rezoning request. Item number 9, public hearing, conditional rezoning application, file number CR007, formerly file number Z740, proposed Charter 1 Bank Branch, 125 Stevenson Highway, and 1250 West 14 Mile Road, Section 35, from old office to District 2, 1B Integrated Industrial and Business District. And Mr. Savina.
I've got the honors of doing this one. We have discussed this item. This will be the fourth meeting where we've talked about this rezoning application. You're all aware of what the applicants is proposing to do. Is proposing to rezone from O office to IB Integrated Industrial and Business District. The parcel's about 7 acres in size. There's a bank branch and an office building on the site, and there's a large asphalt parking lot on the western portion of the site. The portion of the northern boundary abuts residential, and the entire western boundary abuts residential. And the master plan classifies this property as being 21st century industrial, and which does contemplate it would the rezoning to IB would be consistent with this classification. It does actually call for industrial on this property, so it is consistent with the master plan. What the applicant intends to do is seek rezoning to the IB district, which is the most inclusive zoning district in the city. And at the same time, the applicant, the intent of that is for flexibility. They want to market the site. They do not have a developer or developers for the site, and they want flexibility moving forward for marketing the site. They are sensitive to the fact that it is abutting residential, and they have proposed a 30-foot buffer strip along the portion of the property that abuts residential to the north and to the west. What they've also done is they voluntarily provided a list of uses that they will prohibit on the site. And so they basically want approval to use the site for every use in the IB district, with the exception of the following which are permitted. And I'll read them very quickly. Manufacturing and assembly uses which utilize hazardous materials, or which release any odor, noise, or vibration into the environment. Material recovery facilities, bus terminals, building and lumber supplies, outdoor commercial recreation, outdoor storage facilities, open air businesses, adult use businesses, vehicle repair stations, vehicle auctions, vehicle washes, dry cleaners and laundry, central dry cleaning and laundry plants, outdoor dining adjacent to the east and west sides and along the north rear of any buildings, commercial kennels or pet daycare, vehicle fueling stations, ambulance facilities, commercial wind energy conversion systems, meteorological towers, and truck terminals. So what they basically did is they went through the list of uses permitted in section 4.21, and they eliminated all the ones prohibiting them, all the uses that they thought would have a negative detrimental impact on the residential property to the north and to the west. They also proposed some additional conditions in addition to those uses that they prohibited. I'll read those. New buildings and structures shall be subject to all applicable ordinances, site plan requirements, site plan approval. Heights of new buildings shall not exceed 2 stories. A 30-foot landscape greenbelt shall be constructed adjacent to the north and west boundary lines that abut residential homes. Truck deliveries between 11 p.m. and 11 a.m. shall be prohibited, and outdoor storage of materials shall be prohibited. This is somewhat of a different direction for the Planning Commission, because this is the first conditional rezoning application that we've had under the new zoning ordinance, which does not require a site plan attached to the application. We've gone round and round on that, and we had a philosophical discussion with one of our members at the last meeting. Mr. Hudson philosophically, I don't want to put words in Mr. Hudson's mouth, but he philosophically disagrees with the direction of this because there's no site plan tied to the application. I respectfully disagree with Mr. Hudson, and we've already rehashed that and that discussion, but I believe that this application is consistent with the master plan. I think what's the volunteered conditions are reasonable, and we recommend approval. We recommend that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application, move it forward to City Council.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Savinat, Mr. Schultz?
In reading the resolution, item 3 says the applicant has proposed conditions that reduce potential impacts to the proposed IB district on abutting residential properties, but it says nothing about the fact that those conditions are attached to this resolution. I think that should be, what is below should be, I don't know whether it needs to be signed and notarized and attached or whatever, but, you know, I think it needs to go to city council with those conditions attached to it.
Can I have a, Mr. Schultz, so if the resolution were to read, the applicant has prepared the following conditions that reduce potential impacts of the proposed IB district on abutting residential properties and listed them afterwards, would that suffice? That's a good suggestion.
And not only the, let me get the wording right, not only the non-permitted uses, but also the new development shall also be subject to the following. I think that would make the resolution much more inclusive. But I'm not gonna read all that stuff.
Sure.
I agree.
Any other questions for Mr. Savage?
Yes. When they should find a developer that conforms to all these restrictions, then the site plan will come back to the planning commission. And are we able to add any further conditions, especially with regard to the 30-foot green belt?
Yes, at that point, it would be a site plan application. They would have to meet all the requirements of the site plan. So yes. Well, wait a minute. What? If required.
If required, you couldn't add additional conditions that are not part of the, either part of the approval. If it's not a special use, if it's a standard site plan approval, you couldn't add any additional considerations or additions that are not required in the underlying zoning.
Just to follow up, then I would propose, because I'm not really comfortable with just a 30-foot green belt going up to a concrete wall. I think we need to have some conifers planted in there, you know, to inhibit noise and everything like that.
Mr. Stratt.
Yeah, I wasn't here at the last meeting, but this was discussed, but I agree with Mr. Hudson. I think the intent of the state establishing the conditional rezoning was so that all the conditions that we're looking at are on the site plan. And that was my interpretation, that's my understanding as well. I just don't, I'm not comfortable with that, just as indicated. I think that if the developer comes before us with a use, then we come in with the conditional rezoning. But it just is so vague. I just don't understand what we're doing here. I'd be voting against this. I'm not comfortable with this.
Mr. Savage, did you state a minute ago, though, that there is not a requirement now to have a site plan?
The ordinance does not require a site plan as part of the conditional rezoning request. The ordinance used to require a site plan application and a complete site plan packet as part of a conditional rezoning request. That is no longer required.
By our
zoning ordinance.
By our zoning ordinance. Well, I think that was fault, and if I would have known that, I would not have approved it, I'll tell you. That's not really what I understood the intent when the state passed this, what the intent was of the ordinance.
Mr. Massey?
The concern I have is I haven't seen a conditional rezoning agreement, which is required by the new zoning ordinance. There's certain requirements, and I guess that's a concern I should bring to the planning commission.
May I?
Yes.
The applicant is aware of that. The applicant has been trying to contact Ms. Lancaster, who's on vacation until tomorrow. They have been provided model language and they're working on it. So they are aware of that requirement.
So if the resolution was proposed with the addition of Mr. Schultz's comments, could a condition be made that that document be provided and acceptable to the city?
Yes. But it is required. It is required as part of it anyways. So in other words, it can't go to city council without the conditional rezoning agreement. It basically lays out what we've talked about, what the applicant has voluntarily agreed to.
Right. Any other questions for Mr. Savedon? Mr. Krantz?
Is there, are setbacks, now we've got that 30-foot berm, but is there an additional, is there a setback to require it to go any further than that? In other words, they could build a building 30 feet from those residential property lines?
I believe the requirement for IB is 45.
45, okay, so we got another 15 feet. Okay.
But
My-
with
my-
it, just to add on that, within that 45, you're allowed to do certain things. Now, they're proposing this 30-foot buffer, which basically says they can't do what would be normally allowed in that 45 feet. They're not allowed to do it within that 30 feet. So there's that 15-foot area between the 30-foot of their land use buffer and the 45-foot of a setback where they could put drive aisles and such that normally would be allowed in that area.
The point I made at the last meeting regarding this was, I was talking about airspace. Basically, if somebody's growing tomato plants in those residential areas and they've got this building that's shadowing his tomato plants, he can no longer grow tomato plants in his backyard. You know, is there, you know, this is, again, we're talking about sunlight space, you know. So I don't know where I'm going with this other than I would like to, and again, the applicant let us know that they would be parking around the building wouldn't go right up to that setback line, and kind of alleviated my fear of that. But I'm just concerned about the residents with a big brick wall and knocking out their sunlight.
I can't guarantee it, but I would guess that the angle of the sun to give shade on those residents that far away at that time of year, it would not be going.
Would have to be a pretty tall building.
Yeah, okay.
I mean,
All right.
the sun to get that low, would be
Okay.
December.
Mr. Chairman, I misspoke. It's 50, when it's abutting residential, it's 50 feet, not 45.
Okay, there's some space, good. Thanks.
Mr. Schultz.
Question for Mr. Motzner, though you're visiting us. If the requirement for an executed conditional rezoning agreement and the requirements, the prohibitions and the things that have been granted or proposed by the developer are included in this resolution, are you comfortable with it going forward to City Council?
I would be. It does indicate the Planning Commission has to discuss the rezoning agreement, and that is essentially what we are doing. So I believe that the resolution has that condition, that the conditional rezoning agreement plus the other provisions discussed will be provided prior to going to City Council. That should be appropriate. The Planning Commission could approve that.
Thank you.
I'll go back to my request, is the can we set conditions on conditional rezoning? Or can we ask? The conditional rezoning, one of the peculiar requirements is the conditions have to be volunteered by the applicant. In fact, the conditional rezoning agreement must state that these conditions are being volunteered by the applicant. Just follow up on that request. Unless something is done about this 30-foot buffer, I'll be voting no too. Because I don't think that those residents that abut this property should be subjected. You know, how much does, 8 or 10 foot evergreens, that can't cost that much, and it provides sound and wind filter too.
Mr. Savedon or Mr. Carlisle, when this comes back through for site plan, aren't there landscape requirements that are going to be imposed upon this?
There are, but I believe the wall negates the need for the coniferous trees. Now, the applicant's in the room right now, okay, and they're hearing you. Now, we cannot ask for these things.
That's why I asked.
Now, they can voluntarily step to the mic and say, hey, we're willing to do this, or they could say, we're not willing to do this. It's up to them, but it has to be clearly volunteered by the applicant.
Yeah, let me suggest, that's just a fiction. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. Stratt.
Let's get it clear. Once it's approved and they come back with a site plan, we must approve it if it meets all the conditions, correct?
If it's a use permitted by right, correct, yes. If it's a special use, then there's special use standards.
To To go back to Don's comment for just a minute, you said something about 10, 8 or 10-foot conifers. There's 16 properties that abut that 30-foot buffer.
I'm at 8 to 10 foot high.
Okay, I heard you say 10, 8 to 10, and I thought you meant 10 plants, and I'm going, 10 plants isn't gonna do anything.
Yeah, but we're not supposed to be asking for it.
I'm not asking for it, Tom, I'm discussing.
Okay, all right. Mr. Chen.
Any other discussion or questions? All right, Mr. Shep.
Yeah, I am in agreement with what's being said here. We need additional screening. Those people in the neighborhood at least deserve that. I would love to see that building come down and some new usage go in there, but those neighborhoods have to be protected, and to vote on a pig in a poke, I couldn't go along with it.
Mr. Schultz. Isn't the wall that's there right now 10 feet tall, or 8 feet tall rather?
8 feet tall.
So if you put an 8-foot tree, a bunch of 8-foot trees on the petitioner's side of the wall, it's going to be 8 or 10 years before they really do anything to shield the houses next door. There's already an 8-foot wall, and I will bet you that the petitioner has absolutely no intention of tearing down a perfectly good 8-foot tall wall that buffers his property.
All right, is the petitioner here, and would you like to make any comments?
Hi, my name is Daniel Stern. I'm accompanied by Jason Burton. We're the owners of the property, 1250 West 14 Mile Road from Warm Extern Development. First of all, a change from probably like late this evening. There is probably a 50-50 chance I have a user for the building. They're going to take the existing building, it won't come down. There was a plan that was submitted to you previously that contemplated a reuse of the existing building, and then the development of an out parcel would be on the western end of the property. When I say it's 50-50, there are contingencies to the user coming in, and they might walk on me, but I think there's a pretty good chance that that they want to go forward. It's a data center. There won't be a lot of people there. The building's not good for a lot of things. It actually probably is good for a data center. And so I guess I want to start by saying I think there's 45% that we have a use for the building. Quite honestly, I'm not happy about that. I think myself, the best use would have been tearing it down, developing it. I think that would have been the highest and best use. I think that building, it just doesn't represent normally what we do. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not here with the property under contract. I'm not here contemplating it. I put my money out. We own the property. There isn't money coming in from the building, and we can't afford to sit on it. So I think in part of your discussion tonight, and whatever you decide is fine, I really think what we would be talking about would be the development. And was one of the three plans, the plans that we did. Really, unless the user doesn't go through, what we're really talking about is developing an out parcel on the western end of the property, and that was one of the plans that was submitted.
This came up in relationship to some questions about what it was we intended. Did we intend a strip center, or what did we understand? And we presented basically three concepts as to how this might work.
Yeah, and if they proceed, then we're really talking about concept one on your plans. Now, going with concept one, a couple of responses to some items that were said. one, we do want to push, we would want to push the buildings as close to 14 Mile Road as possible. I think of note, right now, it was contemplated that no building was going to be closer to the residences than the current building that was there. Now note that the loading area to that building is then in back of it, with the impervious surface going probably, looks to be about 20 feet with the existing facility. And this, separate from a lot of other residential areas, was built with garage structures really touching this piece of property. And so, you know, the green belt isn't necessarily a 30-foot, the green belt's a 30-foot green belt from any start to building. I would tell you that the building pad A, the actual building pad, is approximately 110 feet to 115 feet from where the property is. You know, basically your parking stalls are 20 feet each. You got a 25 aisle, so we're 65. And you had a 30 green space, and then some other green belt that's there. So I still think that the development of something on the western end would improve the look that we have today. I mean, I think pretty much the parking lot is not in great shape. If it is a data center, there'll be way too much parking there. Obviously, and I'm sure your planner will be quick to respond, if somehow the data center came into an office building, then you wouldn't have enough parking, and obviously that wouldn't be permitted. But if the data center does go there, you know, we think that concept one would fit in well, would provide more than adequate buffer. In fact, a lot more than is there today. And you know, really, unless something falls out with the user for the building, that's what I know everybody was looking to see what we would do. That's what we see happening on the site.
All right, let me just interrupt you. Brent, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to, the concepts that they're referring to were presented at the last meeting. The Planning Commission had asked for conceptually what could potentially, what are you thinking of, what could potentially go here? And that was presented at the last meeting. Because I thought that conversation was kind of over, and the concepts were not included as part of the conditions. I didn't include those, so the concepts that they're referring to, no one's got them. So.
Oh, I apologize. I thought at one point I know we had.
He wasn't here at the last meeting.
Right.
He came, that meeting, we were 8th on the agenda, and we were out of here almost at 7:30, so he showed up here about 7:45. We were all in the parking lot. It was a great night. If I might, let me help contextualize this. In terms of the conversation, oh, I'm sorry. Is this mic live?
It just picks up, it doesn't amplify.
Yeah, you don't need to.
All right. In terms of the conversation about the greenbelt, we propose that as a greenbelt, always with the intention of the condition under Roman numeral 2 that is part of the conditional use that new buildings and structures shall be subject to all applicable ordinances, site plan requirements, and site plan approval. Until this last 10 minutes, I was under the impression that the landscape plan would be required in that area at the time site plan approval would be submitted. It is our intention to plant trees in that green space, not maintain it as green space. So I'm happy to add a condition to this that says that the green belt will be landscaped at that time. And we can go from there. That puts away that concern. With respect to what you said, Commissioner Stratt, I'd like to, I don't know whether the commission wants to go through the discussion that we had as to why this particular conditional use was appropriate in this case, but I'm happy to go through that again if you would like that, and that would be important to your consideration, because there was an extensive discussion about that. And
well, my only comment back to you would be this: you know, you understand, you can get the feel of we're all trying to work with you, and we all want this to be developed. But I can't understand why you need the the special land use approval in order to market this.
Not special land use approval, it's
Well, the
appropriate.
conditional approval, and I can't perceive that. I think that we're putting the cart before the horse. Actually, when you have the user and you have the concept that you want, that's when you come in with a special land use, and then we can specifically say, yeah, we agree, we like it.
If it's okay.
But right now, it's all verbiage.
If it's okay, I'd like to address that specifically, because as I said in the last meeting, if we came in
I'm
for a
sorry, I
straight,
wasn't present.
if we came in for a straight rezoning, this probably wouldn't even arise as a matter of course, even though you might want to see the plan. Our particular problem is, in marketing this site, we're stacked up against all kinds of other properties, including properties adjacent to this along Stevenson Highway that are already zoned. And if what we have is to be able to attract users that show them by right what we can do, we don't have that, and it's our considered opinion that without that, those people are going to go to another site rather than spend time, even though you and I both firmly agree most likely what we propose would be submitted. So what we did was we went through the ordinance to see what the obnoxious uses were that clearly would be incompatible with the adjacent residential uses there, and took them out of this so that we were in a better zoning position so people knew what we were going to get. It would be a significant competitive disadvantage to us if we thought in any way, shape, or form that we had to come back to get that approval simultaneously with it. So we've tried to cover that base. Mr. Hudson understands that philosophically, disagrees with it notwithstanding that, and that's fine, but I wanted to do that for your benefit, because from our standpoint, it's a very serious inhibition to being able to market the site in today's market.
Yeah. Respond. When we come in with conditional rezoning, is that not automatically a part of the site plan approval process as well?
Could you repeat? I don't know what you mean.
Okay. If someone comes in with a plan,
Right.
and they're coming in with the understanding they want a conditional rezoning, they come in with a full site plan, correct?
If they voluntarily do that, but they haven't they're not required to.
Okay. I'm just saying that if they were to do that, isn't that an automatic condition that it's a site plan approval as well as conditional approval?
Yes.
I don't see where there's any difference in time lag that you were talking about. Because that, if you come in and you have a buyer and you have somebody all set, that's all you need to do is come in and say, hey, this is what we're gonna do. This is plan A, plan B that you're talking about, and it's all set.
But we're not zoned for that. We can't do this under a straight office zoning, and therefore the user doesn't know whether or not the planning commission knows.
When you're marketing that, aren't you marketing, telling them what can be done, what can't be done?
We want to be able to do that, but right now we can only tell anybody it's available for office use, and that we think it could be used for commercial purposes that we think would be compatible.
I'll tell you, I know a couple of sites right now that there's signs out there that are saying that they are commercial, and they haven't been rezoned to commercial yet, but they're marketing it as commercial.
They may not get any users as a result of it, anybody who starts to do their due diligence.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I respectfully, I want to respond to that question.
Yeah.
We've been in business for 23 years. We own 4 million square feet in the state of Michigan. Reputation is extremely important. I would never put it out there as a commercial site if it's not. It's just, I wouldn't want to move my reputation with retailers. I mean, with in our business with retail, relationships is everything. And the last thing we would want to do is tell somebody it's commercial, have them come in to a meeting like this, and instead of a site plan approval meeting, we're talking about rezoning, and then when we talk to them about every other site, we get blown out of the water. So
That's our dilemma in a nutshell.
All right, thank you. This is a public hearing. Anyone in the audience speak on this topic? Seeing no one, bring it back to the table. Mr. Schultz?
Just have one comment. First of all, congratulations on a potential tenant. It's wonderful news. My only concern is if we're going with a tenant for the 1250 building and an outlot building, these people could end up with a 24-hour coffee shop cafe drive-through directly adjacent to their residential properties. concern for me. But
They could do what?
they could have a 24-hour drive-through in the outlot, could they not, Mr. Sabanet?
Didn't they put a time restriction on?
They put a time restriction on deliveries.
A drive-through does require a special use, so they would have to come in as part of the site plan, they have to come in with special use approval as part of that.
With special use, they could have a drive-through.
Special use, they could drive-through, similar to every other IB zone property along.
All right, as long as it's special use, I'm okay with it.
Any further discussion? We have a resolution to consider this matter.
Chairman, I'd like to move, resolve, but unfortunately, I don't recall this,
Just a
the
minute.
conditions of Mr. Schultz.
Just a minute.
Page 57 of the PDF.
Resolved that the Planning Commission hereby recommends to City Council that the O to 1B or IB conditional rezoning request as per section 16.03 of the City of Troy zoning ordinance located on the northwest corner of Stevenson Highway and 14 Mile, 125 Stevenson and 1250 West 14 Mile within section 35, being approximately 7 acres in size, be granted subject to the following. One would be the execution of a conditional rezoning agreement. 2, the application is consistent with the master plan. 3, the application is compatible with the existing zoning districts and land uses. And 3, the application or the applicant has proposed and attached to this resolution are conditions that reduce the potential impact of the proposed IB zoning district onto the abutting residential properties. And I think there needs to be one more, just a minute. And also that also includes additional conditions as to the approval of the new development. I think that's what I wanted to say.
Sounds good.
I support, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Zenzika, thank you. Mr.
Do we need something in there, or can this list be amended to include the landscaping of that 30-foot buffer?
Clearly, Mr. Horton indicated verbally that he'd be willing to add additional landscaping, so what we can do is we can add another bullet point to number 2 of his handout. Take care of it that way.
I have no problem with
Any discussion? Kathy, the roll call, please.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Shepke?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
that. Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
No.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Well, I philosophically disagree with Mr. Horton and Mr. Sabanad. Practically speaking, I think this is zoned IB in our master plan. I think if it went through with a rezoning, it would be granted, and therefore, because there are some limitations on the IB, as this proposed conditional rezoning has been requested, I will vote yes.
Mr. Kempen?
Yes.
Mr. Krantz?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you next month. Oh, no, you won't be back.
We'll come back again. We will, as a side note, we'll keep posted the developments of the deal that we got for the existing building.
Great.
Thank you.
I think you're going to be hearing from him tomorrow
Excellent.
anyway.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Happy to see a sign other than for
We have
sale.
one more item
In the
on
city
the
of Troy.
agenda. Are we willing to continue forward, or does somebody need a potty break?
Go.
Let's go. Good, okay. Item number 10, conditional rezoning application, file number CR 006, proposed Troy Plaza, west side of Crooks, south of Square Lake, 5500 New King, section 8, from PUD 13, planned unit development 13 to CB community business and OM office mixed-use districts. And Mr. Carlisle.
Thank you. It's very ironic, I guess, that we're going to talk about this item after consideration of the last item, because this is in line with what Mr. Stratt was talking about in regards to the actual site plan as a condition of a conditional rezoning. And we can get into the whole, before we got into the whole philosophical discussion of whether a site plan is required or not, but the applicant And this has come back before the planning commission. I think this is maybe the third time or so the planning commission has actually seen this. And a condition of the conditional rezoning of the site is the approved site plan. We've written a very short memo on this, and there's been a few developments that we've had with the applicant since we've written this memo. The first issue that we discussed with the applicant was they have a pretty clear understanding of what they want to do on the front end of the site. When I talk about the front end of the site, I talk about that end that fronts on Crooks. The portion that they want to zone to commercial. The back end of the site is where they're still kind of up in the air in terms of what the actual final use is going to be, as well as what the building footprint might be. They initially submitted 2 site plans as part of that. Again, the front end of the site was consistent between both site plans. The back end had different users and footprints. In discussion with the applicant, it became pretty clear that they really don't know what they're going to do in the back end of the site. And he can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm going down the wrong path here, but they don't really have an end user for this site in terms of what they're going to be doing. And so it's not necessarily appropriate to tie a site plan to that back end of the site if they're not sure what they're going to do. It's just eventually require a kind of amendment to the conditional rezoning for the site plan if we adopt a site plan for this back end of the site, which they don't, the footprint might change. They show, one of their elevations shows an 8-story hotel. Well, it might be 4 stories, and so you get into the issues of, you get into that detail with the conditional rezoning. When does that trigger them have to come back? And so the whole point, this is a philosophical difference, is there should be some flexibility, some intent to have some flexibility in the conditional rezoning that gives the planning commission the direction, yeah, this is heading in the right direction. It still has to go through site plan approval. There are limited conditions on it, such as use, etc. But it doesn't require the specific details of you get into a approved site plan. In addition, one of the other issues is if you adopt a site plan as a condition of a conditional use, is you're essentially adopting a site plan contingent upon a zoning district that doesn't exist yet. And so there's some process issues too. And for this application, he has to also get a variant, at least 2 variances based on his site plan. So you're approving a condition, a site plan that has to get approval from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and if that doesn't get approved, it has to come back. There's some complexity issues. So that being, all that mumble jumble being said, because the applicant is asking for a condition as a site plan as a condition of the conditional rezoning, we cannot recommend approval of the conditional rezoning. We agree in concept with what the applicant's proposing. We agree with the uses that the applicant is proposing, especially on the front end side of Crooks. We have just some issues with the site plan. And because the site plan is a condition, we cannot approve the conditional rezoning. We met with the applicant. He understands our position. He is willing to meet with us at a later date to kind of go over these site plan issues, see if we can come with any solution. But it is the prerogative of the applicant. If the site plan is his condition and he still wants to go through with the site plan that he submitted, he can ask the planning commission to act upon that. However, from our standpoint, we just don't feel comfortable recommending approval based on the submitted site plan at this time. And those issues of what our site plan, that we have the site plan, have been reiterated in the past 2 previous memos that I have provided to the planning commission. So I don't think I need to necessarily go over them in any detail at this meeting, but I'm open for any questions and any dialogue we have with the applicant. I think what the applicant is looking for is, one is, if he did come in, if he was able to address some of the site plan issues, would the planning commission be okay with the concept that he has more of a fixed site plan on the front end of the site and the back end of the site based on the conditions that he proposes in terms of uses, and not necessarily a site plan, if that's the direction the planning commission is willing to go with. And I'll open to any questions, and the applicant can fill in any holes I missed. Mr. Erlen.
Philosophically, we'd be on the fence. We'd have the site plan on the front and the flexibility on the back. It's a win-win.
Is anybody else as confused as I am right now?
Can I?
Yes.
He doesn't know what he wants in the back.
I have a question. If this was, let's say the construction was phased, we got his approval, but he still didn't know what he wanted on the back end, how long does that approval last until, I mean, it's going in for an item? I mean...
It would be rezoned, so
it runs with the land.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, both of those markets in North Troy right now are hurting big time. Mr. Stratt.
It kind of scares me. The only thing that I see that that whole area is really, well, you have an office in that area. So you know what the vacancy rate is for offices. And I mean, there's a retail center right across the street from this, but I see that McDonald's, I think that's McDonald's.
Right.
I mean, that's a sure thing. I think that looked like a sure thing to me. And it looked like that portion, you know, you're very confident about. The rest of it is questionable, I think, you know. Is that correct? I should be really addressing it.
I
shouldn't be.
Yeah, hang on a second.
No,
I'll wait till you're done.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Schultz.
Oh, my concern is, because I think I understand we're approving a conditional or potential conditional rezoning, but we don't know what it's being conditionally rezoned to on the back third of the property. My concern is, with phasing of construction, I got this horrible feeling that it's gonna be kind of like John R. and Big Beaver, and we're gonna end up with a McDonald's and nothing else. A bunch of empty land.
I don't disagree. That's everyone's concern, I think, is vacant. We don't want to see vacant property, but let's say for argument's sake that the applicant just came forward with a straight rezoning, no conditions, rezoned it to whatever, and decided to phase it, and we got a site plan just for the front half, and the back half wasn't contemplated, we would review, and if it met our standards, we'd approve the front half, the back half would sit vacant, and we, you know, that happens, and that could happen on any property in the city.
But we have a horrible eyesore that is a graphic example of that at John R. and Big Beaver. And that's my concern, is we approve this. I really don't have a problem with flexibility on the back, but we approve this and we end up with a McDonald's and flexibility on the back and nothing on the south two-thirds of the property.
You're overstating. I need to speak because you're overstating the flexibility.
You get it, just hang on.
I think based on a very, very brief discussion we had today with Mr. Gordon, is that they'd be willing to take some steps to ensure that in the meantime that property is vacant, that it'll be appropriately landscaped, seeded, maintained, so it's not going to be an eyesore.
The other thing I'll throw out there, have you all driven by it now?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, anything would look better than
Garden
that
spot.
Yeah. And, you know, this is a fairly well-traveled exit off of I-75, you know, one of the first impressions.
I agree with that, and that developing this as a non-office location would probably enhance the office marketability in the surrounding areas as well, so. In that regard, I think I'd be willing to go.
All right. Petitioner now like to get up.
Okay, you're overstating the case a little bit here. Okay, Mike Gordon back here. It's hard, I need a pointer.
Do you need a pointer here?
Mike Gordon, we have agreed that the.
red.
Yeah. Oops.
Just don't do
Oh,
that.
That wasn't the red button.
It didn't look red to me, sorry about that. There it is.
It's the very top one right here.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. This is the McDonald's. This building, phase one, we start immediately construction of these two buildings. That building is a go. It has a second floor office and the retail on the first floor. We have a lot of interest in that. We've agreed that these two buildings get built immediately. What the flexibility is, we've put a 6,000 square foot footprint here. We are in negotiations with different restaurants. One's of 4,800, one's of 5,400, one's of 6,000. That's the flexibility we need because we don't know, and that building, you know, based on these chains, they have a certain standard and they have a certain footprint and they have a certain design. That's the flexibility we're talking about. We are heavily marketing that this is going to be a hotel or an office building. Certain hotels want to be 88 rooms, some want to be 100, some want to be 130. An office building may want to be 28,000 square feet or 40 if we find the end user. That's the flexibility we're talking about. We're not saying it's going to sit idle or vacant. We are actively marketing it. But we can't lock into a footprint right now because if we get a flag, which we're actively marketing with 3 flags right now, each flag has its own particular set of requirements for both the number of rooms and the amenities on the site. That's what we're talking about as far as flexibility. These two buildings are locked in. That's the footprint we're going to build. That's the footprint we're going to build. And we've agreed to go ahead with both of those. It's the only way that this becomes viable And we have to build all the infrastructure in front of that in order for the site to work. There'll be the vacant pad where the restaurant is, but it could be a 4,800 square foot, 5,400 square foot, 6,000, and be elongated. It may move the entrance based on, there may be a porte cochere, based on the chain that we finally negotiate with. That's the flexibility we need.
Any other comments, or is that your conclusion?
And the other thing, I think Brett and will attest to that, we've talked about, we're like 97% of the way there. We talked about that. We tried to get everything resolved by today, but there's just a couple issues that are kind of a sticking point. We have 18 different people involved in this project, between the 11 end users, the 2 developers, the 2 landscapers, the 2 engineers, the 2 architects. There's a lot of people at the table that need to all agree to every change.
Add 9 more.
Yeah, and 9. And hopefully the 2,200 customers that come there every day.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Close. Mr. Edmonds.
I was out to the site today again, and particularly right down there by the, is that a retention pond or
Yeah.
detention? Retention pond?
Detention.
And there are some really, up on the hills, there's some at least 10 to 12 inch oaks and maples, probably a dozen or more. Is it your intention to try to save those if at all possible?
We'd be more than willing to work with the site as much as we can, although there has been the pressure to push the buildings as close to the intersection as possible, so.
This is close to the pond, it's right up, in fact, when I was out there, there's actually old landscape lighting at the base of those 12-inch trees that are still there.
Right.
I just think that would be something that would really enhance even a restaurant that would go in there.
Mr. Schultz?
Question for Mr. Savant and Mr. Carlisle. Initially, when we were talking about this, your recommendation was to eliminate the drive-through on the Crooks Road building, and it's still on the site plan. So I'm assuming that you've negotiated to your satisfaction on that drive-through location?
And hence the 3%.
Well, yeah, to be perfectly honest, that's the sticking point. That's the primary sticking point at this point. And due to a couple reasons. First off, we do find it creates some very tricky circulation problems throughout the site. It essentially, for lack of a better term, in our opinion, it sticks out into the middle of the parking lot. It's only going to be buffered by curbs, and there's some potential conflicts as a result of that. Second of all, it requires a variance because it is only 8 stacking spaces deep. It requires 10 by ordinance, and so that's a secondary concern of ours. We met with OHM, the traffic engineer, today. He also expressed a little bit of concern regarding that drive-through and its particular location. And so we do have a scheduled meeting this Thursday to meet with the applicant as well as the traffic engineer to kind of work out some of these issues. But to get to your point, long story short, yes, that is probably the main sticking point in regards to approval of the site plan.
Okay, so if we need to be legal, whether it's a good design or bad design, to be legal, we need an additional car, is what you're saying.
We need two additional stacking spaces.
So we need 2 things. We need 10 stacking spaces, and these aren't permitted.
These what?
These 4 parking spaces in front of the building
Are or are not?
Are not permitted.
I thought that was requested of
Well,
the developer at some point.
If that was the request that we made, then we were in error.
So my point was going to be eliminating those 4 parking places and pulling the building forward that length is still not going to address the number of stacking spaces needed to be legal.
We talked about that today, and no, it would not.
Is there any way we can give a variance on the number of stacking spaces depending on who the tenant in that end building is?
The stacking spaces, the requirement for stacking spaces is 10 for restaurant, but other uses have less of a requirement. So theoretically, if it was agreed upon that that user was not a restaurant, then yeah, the issue would
Was not
be.
and will not.
But the issue, that is still the fact that the drive-through, we have to see how it lays out, but.
But
with
if
reduced
that was
drive-through.
granted, it would have, the agreement would have to be that
It could
the
be no
current
more.
resident, or current tenant is not, and no future tenant shall be a restaurant in that location.
If it was something like dry cleaning or something a lot like maybe a small pharmacy or something where it's a lot less of a stacking requirement, then I think this would probably work better, but I haven't seen the design, but the restaurant demands the most stacking spaces. Probably, and unfortunately, probably the potential tenants are probably, it's a longer list with restaurants than it would be with other.
Oh, certainly.
Mr. Grant?
This is for Ben Carlisle. For those 10 spaces, if there were 2 lanes there, and they reconfigured, again, the parking lot to fit, is it 2 lanes of 5? Or is it 10 all stacked in one line?
It's based on the number of windows, but at a minimum, it's 10 stacking spaces for a food or restaurant type use.
So you couldn't put them into 2 lines and say, we've got our 10? Okay.
Well, we'll talk, I mean, I'm trying to set up a meeting later this week, and we'll talk about potential, design options and whatnot, and that's the intent, is to keep them moving forward. Like I said, we're close.
Yeah, and part of this too is also, contingent upon this, is drive-throughs require special uses. So we'll also have to address the special use standards in addition to the site plan review standards as part of their submittal. We haven't, as well as variances that actually has to go in front of the zoning board of appeals too, for what they're proposing. So
Potentially.
there's some issues to work through in regards to that.
Mr. Schultz? On the proposed restaurant pad, we've been told it's going to fluctuate. Can it be specified that it shall not be less than 4,800 or more than 6,000 or 6,200 or something in that site?
It can be voluntarily offered by the petitioner as part of the conditional rezoning.
Because we probably aren't going to get a 4,800 square foot fast food restaurant there.
Mr. Evans? Mr. Evans?
I'm not going to raise any philosophical questions in this one. But the last time we discussed the philosophy, I kind of indicated that when they indicated there might be an office or a hotel on that spot. So we gave you 2 choices, that'd be okay? And I said, yeah, it'd probably be okay. Is that still in question down there in that area?
We submitted both plans.
I know you did.
Yeah.
But is that still in question? Might that change? Or is it just the restaurant that's in flux?
The footprint of the hotel, or the footprint, we showed what we thought would be the maximum that we'd be able to put on the site. We can certainly step back from that, and there are users that would, like I said, some hotels want to have 88 rooms, some have 100, some have 130, based on the different flags that you market to.
So that's pretty well set.
Right.
Your use.
Right.
Okay.
We're happy with those 2 uses. This is what they own, this is what they want to put there. And yeah, we would be willing to voluntarily say, these are the only 2 things we're going to market to. Much like when we said to the corner is going to be a restaurant, it's not going to be a drugstore, it's not going to be a higher intense use of that.
Okay.
But we just need the flexibility because
I understand.
all these different chains have so many different requirements.
Mr. Stratton?
Yeah, I just hypothetically, why do we have to go with the entire site when he is confident that he's going to build the 2 buildings correct right now? Why can't we actually separate the area that you're going to be working in?
Where's the plan? We have the phase plan is in here.
Pardon me?
The phase plan is in here. If you skip the phase.
What would be the advantage, Tom?
Because he doesn't know what he's going to do with the restaurant. We don't know what the materials are going to be. We have no idea what he's going to do there. We have no idea what he's going to do with the hotel. Is it going to be 10-story, 20-story, or 5-story? You know, there's a lot in limbo. But we do know, definitely, the restaurant's going. I mean, I'm talking about
McDonald's.
Fast food, McDonald's, and we know that you're going to build that. So everything related to that, I think we should give you an approval on. The rest of it is subject to you're coming back, which we know you're gonna do. I mean, we
Yeah,
hope
there
you
is a-
do. Correct?
Correct.
I think part of what I've heard, there are site plan issues, not so much, is it gonna be a hotel, or is it gonna be, but it's circulation, it's the layout of the site, which, you know, you can't just say, we'll give you approval on that, we'll not even consider what you're gonna do back here. I think we'd like to see.
No,
the whole
I'm not
thing.
saying we're not gonna consider that.
Right,
I'm saying that.
At this point of giving approval for those two buildings.
Yeah, but everything related to those two buildings, I mean, it seemed like a straight line, straight down from that. That appears to me that it couldn't very well work.
That's kind of the direction I think that the applicant wants to take it.
Oh,
For the,
that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it really does. You know, and we can look at the elevations, we can be specific about what it's gonna look like and what the materials are, what the,
and if they did go down that road.
photometrics and everything else.
If they did go on that road, then I keep referring to the back end of the site, the hotel or office portion of the site would still have to come in for site plan approval at a later date when they get the
Exactly.
finalized plans of what they're exactly doing.
Yeah, might even be, again, a PUD there. Or no, special land use. What's the application?
A hotel requires special land use.
Yeah, I thought so. Yes. I thought it did. Yeah.
Are you at all concerned about not seeing how the site will develop from the site plan if we just isolate our focus on those two buildings?
There's a lot of dance in this involved because what the condition is the site plan. The condition on the conditional rezoning site plan. It really depends on what the applicant is proposing to do as part of the first phase. If he can show us the first phase that we built, and that's the approved site plan, we can overcome some of those hurdles, and then I think.
As much as a potential danger for them is for us. Once we put buildings on the site, and, I mean, there's maybe some options that are no longer options.
Right.
You know, both ways.
Right, and that's why again, the approval of a site plan as a condition of the conditional rezoning raises all these red flags. And that's why we took it out of requirement, we took it out of the requirement for when the zoning ordinance was rewritten, so we got to the idea of this concept plan, which is what the applicants were requesting to do on the hotel end of the site. So they would come back, they'd get their conceptual approval for the conditional rezoning based on conditions that are worked on or agreed upon by the applicant. Then they would come back when they have a final end user for a final site plan approval.
But this is the problem, when we have final site plan approval. If they meet all the conditions, we're screwed. We have no flexibility.
It's similar to that if it was just a straight rezoning, they came in for site plan approval.
Or even under straight.
Well, the thing that I would have concern about is when you're gonna put the infrastructure in there, what are you gonna do? How much of it are you gonna tear out? You know, that's the kind of a thing that and Mr. Schultz is absolutely right with respect to, you know, Big Beaver and John R. I mean, that they put in all the roads, they put everything else, but it looked like garbage.
Mr. Schultz, you had a question or comment?
Comment was made about just approve the two buildings that are committed to. I would have a real problem not doing everything that faces Crooks Road and Corporate Drive as one project. I can see giving them some flexibility to develop the back end of the property, but I think there needs to be some cohesiveness and some control over that southeast corner of the property.
I just want to, I agree with Mr. Schultz. Mainly, not only is the facing the Crooks situation, it's traffic flow through those three buildings. We've got that's an annoying line of backed up cars that absolutely creates a barrier for pedestrians to get from that restaurant if they wanted to walk over to those other stores. You got to organize that traffic flow, the vehicular traffic flow well enough so that the pedestrian traffic flow doesn't have a problem. And that's a stumbling block for me, that line of cars.
Mr. Shipke.
I don't know why we can't take that line of cars and arc it. In other words, put them on a curve so they're heading one way or the other, and still, even if there's some minor reconfiguring of parking spaces or whatever, I don't like a big line of cars hanging out like that. And there's a lot of fast food restaurants that I've been to that do have the stacking on a 90 degree.
The issue with that, when we discussed with the applicant, is the fact that because there's no parking in the front, they have access off the back end of the building. So if you start wrapping the cars around the back end of the building, you block that entrance.
Well, you don't have to wrap them immediately next to the building. They can be wrapped out a ways. In other words, and still have access to the back of the building. You're going to have to keep the back of the building open because these are long, narrow segments, each one of these. Because this, to me, looks like one building they're going to cut in possibly 3 restaurants or three individual buildings with the offices on top. I just wondered if there's any way to reconfigure that line of cars so that everybody can be satisfied and it doesn't screw things up so bad that it's not doable.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I think we're not going to solve it here all tonight, so I think if we look at the resolution, let the developer and our staff and consultant work together and see what they can come up with.
Do we need a resolution, or do we just need to take no action?
There is a resolution. Is it your desire?
What page?
It's on page 71. 74?
What? What page of the PDF?
I'm sorry, you're correct.
There's a resolution.
Is that your desire?
Resolved that the Planning Commission postpones consideration of the proposed conditional rezoning application until such time that the applicant submits a site plan that complies with the zoning ordinance and meets with staff to discuss the issues listed in the Planning Commission report.
So do a second, Mr. Stratt. Any discussion? Kathy, on a roll call, please.
Mr. Shepke?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Kempen?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
All right, motion passes. Thank you. Appreciate your diligence.
And we do really take into consideration all the input. So we thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. All right, we're on to the last bin here, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Public comments? Public comments tonight, all right? Let's go around the table with Planning Commission comments. Let's start with you, Mr. Metzger.
No comments, thanks.
No comment.
No comment.
Last week, I didn't attend this meeting, and I attended the Bloomfield Township Zoning Board of Appeals. I had a condition there that they had 20 items on their agenda, and they went through them like it was just amazing how strict they are, but there were 20 items. One of the things that I did notice is that they don't have roll call votes. Unless there is a negative, unless there's one that says a negative, then they actually go with roll call. Prior to that, it's done real quick. There's no delays, no delays. I don't know if that would help at all, but since this is a study session, I thought I'd bring that up as a possibility of improving. Well, it's almost 10 o'clock now.
Well, the vote part takes very little time. It's
I recognize
stuff
that.
in between.
But anyways, thank you for your thought.
I recognize that, but it does add more time to it. I was very impressed and very professional.
Mr. Kemp? Mr. Kempen?
Well, it's my first meeting, so thanks everybody for saying hi and welcoming me aboard, and look forward to working with you. Those that I haven't already worked with, I'm familiar with that as well, so thanks. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz?
Nothing.
No comment.
Mr. Zanzika?
I reiterate what Tom has suggested. I've been on other committees and commissions, and unless it's statutory, I don't understand why we have a roll call vote for the agenda and for, all these different items. It just takes a lot of time, but I don't think it's necessary.
Mr. Bosley, can you shed any light on this for the city of Troy?
I don't believe it's a requirement, but I think it's a good idea to have roll call votes, especially with the ZBA actually, because ZBA actions are subject to court challenge from anybody, and I think it's a good idea to know exactly how each person votes, and that's stated in the minutes of the meeting. But it's not, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, they did, if it's unanimous, there was no problem. But if it wasn't, then they went to roll call. So they know exactly who did not vote for it.
Yeah, but when, especially with the zoning board of appeals, even if there's nobody there, there could be someone lurking in the background that could still challenge the decision of the board if they're an aggrieved party.
Anything else, Bill?
I just had a comment on the first issue for the curb cutting. I mean, I used to ride my bike to school when I was in elementary school, so I think the safety thing is an important thing. And someone brought up adding sidewalks. I don't think that's a bad idea. So.
No, thank you.
I'll be real brief. We, at a future meeting within the next month, hopefully too, we'd like to have a working session to talk about this conditional zoning process and how we proceed with it in the future, just so everyone's on the same page in terms of process and submittals, et cetera.
What do you mean by that, Ben?
We can have a philosophical discussion about that.
All right.
Nice job, by the way, tonight.
Thank you.
Mr. Simon?
I've spoken up.
Yeah, I'm going to make it brief. Again, welcome, Mr. Kempen. It's good to have you aboard. Thank you all for your time and hanging in till 9:45. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.